Ladies and gentlemen, you want to know what you need to know before you go and take the DMV test? You want to cheat on your test? Well, you need to know this. Look what I got for you here. Right here. This is what you need to know. It's the answers. And only the answers. Listen to this 10-minute video once or twice. Go in and take your test. You're going to pass it with no problem. And this unique way of listening to it in this video is going to stick in your brain like no other video. And this is why. It's going to stick in your head because you're going to hear this. Answer. Every time you hear answer, you're going to hear the answer. Let's begin. Question number 1. If you are in an accident involving hazardous materials, you should keep all people far away and upwind of the accident. You need to warn of a stopped vehicle which has a tank used for flammable liquids or gases. Now you may use reflective triangles. The power unit of a placarded vehicle must have a fire extinguisher with a UL rating of what? 10 or more BC. A properly prepared uniform hazardous waste manifest must be signed and carried by anyone transporting a hazardous waste. A safe haven is an approved place for parking unattended trucks loaded with explosives. To find out if a shipment includes a hazardous material, you should look at the shipping paper. If hazardous material is spilled from your vehicle, move your vehicle no more than safety requires. You are carrying placarded Class 7 radioactive material. You must stop before railroad crossings. Is this true? Yes. You have a vehicle without racks to hold cylinders of compressed gas. You may load such cylinders only if they are loaded upright or braced lying down. You are transporting hazardous materials. When you are not behind the wheel, the shipping papers must be on the driver's seat or in the driver's door pouch. When are you allowed to move an improperly placarded vehicle carrying hazardous materials? During an emergency in order to protect life and property. The basic description of a hazardous material includes the hazard class, the identification number, and the proper shipping name. Which one must appear first on the shipping paper? The proper shipping name. The shipper of hazardous wastes may have to put the word waste before the proper shipping name of the material on the shipping paper. To stop for railroad tracks, you should stop how many feet before the nearest track? 15 to 50 feet. Carriers must give each driver who transports explosives 1.1 or 1.2 a copy of FMCS Part 397. If flammable solid or oxidizing materials are spilled, you should warn others of the fire hazard. The shipping name may be abbreviated in the basic description of hazardous materials only if it is specifically authorized in the hazardous materials regulations. If a hazardous material is spilled, carriers must file detailed reports with the National Response Center within how many days? 30 days. Explosives 1.1 must not be transported in a combination vehicle if it includes A placarded cargo tank. A hazard class name or ID number may not be used to describe a non-hazardous material. Cylinders containing compressed gases may only be loaded into a vehicle if the cylinders are loaded upright or braced laying down flat. The National Response Center checks that the shipper has properly labeled all hazard materials. Which signal may be used to warn of a stopped vehicle which contains explosives? Reflective triangles. If you have a hazardous material fire on the road, you should open the cargo doors. When loading or unloading an explosive, never use any cargo hooks or metal tools. Which of these partial lists contains the information you need in order to determine which placard to use? The hazard class of materials and the amount of hazard materials in your truck. A driver who transports route-controlled radioactive material must have had special training by the carrier within how many of the last years? Within 2 years. If the word inhalation hazard are on the shipping paper or package, you must display poison placards in addition to any other needed placards. The transport index of a radioactive material tells the degree of control needed during transportation. Who is responsible for finding out what permits or special routes you will need to haul hazardous materials? The driver. When hauling hazardous materials, you must stop your vehicle and check any dual tires at least every how many miles or hours? Every 2 hours or 100 miles. If the symbol D appears in column 1 of the hazardous materials table, then the proper shipping name of the hazardous material is appropriate for describing materials for international transportation, but may not be appropriate for domestic transportation. If the word forbidden appears in the hazard class column of an entry in the hazardous materials table, a common carrier must never transport this material. A flammable liquid can be transported from one tanker to another on a public roadway if it is an emergency situation. Generally, the WHO must certify on the shipping paper that the shipment has been prepared in the correct manner. The shipper. You may not park a vehicle carrying hazardous materials within how many feet of an open fire? 300 feet. When carrying explosives and you have a breakdown or crash, do not allow smoking or fire near the vehicle. Smoking is prohibited when loading or unloading which of the following? Class A5 oxidizers. An X in the HM column of a shipping paper entry means that The entry is for a hazardous material. Shipping names that are shown in italics in the hazard materials table are not proper shipping names. Drivers must have special training before transporting what? Flammable cryonic liquids. Which code requires the diamond-shaped warning signs be placed on some hazardous materials? Title 49 CFR. Entries in italics in column 2 of the hazardous materials table are abbreviated shipping names. Which one of the symbols shown can be entered into column 1 of the hazardous materials table? X. A hazard class name or ID number may not be used to describe a non-hazardous material. The basic description of a hazardous product includes the hazard class, the ID number, the proper shipping name, and what? Packaging group. A person who transports hazardous waste in California must obtain what from the Department of what? Must obtain hazardous waste transportation registration from the Department of Toxic Substance Control. Your vehicle contains explosives, oxidizers, or flammables. No one may smoke within how many feet of the vehicle? 25 feet. The total transportation index of all radioactive material packages in a single vehicle must not exceed 50. A safe haven is a what? Approved place for parking unattended vehicles loaded with explosives. So a safe haven is a government approved place. You are transporting 2,000 pounds of Class 8 materials. You may park within how many feet of what? 5 feet of the traveled part of the road. Tank vehicles transporting what must have fire extinguishers rated to not less than what? Transporting combustible liquid, fire extinguisher not rating less than 20 BC. A carrier must give each transporting division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosives what? A copy of FMCSR Part 397. You are in the sleeper berth of a vehicle placarded for hazardous materials. Where must the shipping papers be? On the driver's seat. Now, a motor carrier who transports hazardous materials subject to VC 277903 must have a hazardous materials transportation license. If the word forbidden appears in the what of the hazardous materials table, the material is what? Appears in the column 3. The material must never be transported. Marine pollutants are regulated in what bulk quantities only on highways? Marine pollutants are regulated in interstate and interstate commerce. Intrastate and interstate commerce. Now, which of the following is not an acceptable exception to a shipper's certification on a shipping paper? The shipper is a private carrier transporting a product not its own. What signals may be used to warn other drivers of a stopped vehicle transporting Class 3 materials? Reflective triangles. When fueling a placarded vehicle, someone must always be at the nozzle controlling the fuel flow. If safety requires an emergency transfer of Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosives, it is best to warn others on the road with red warning reflective triangles. Now, when fueling a placarded vehicle, someone must always be at the nozzle controlling the fuel flow. You have loaded a hazardous material into a cargo tank. What must you do before you move the vehicle? Close all manholes and valves and be sure they are free of leaks. Explosives 1.1 must not be transported in a single transport vehicle that includes Class 7 radioactive materials. With most hazardous materials, you may park within 5 feet of the road briefly, if your work requires it. Now, the materials which are the exception do not allow parking near the roads are explosives 1.1 and 1.2. When you discover a hazardous material cargo leak, identify the hazardous material. A railroad crossing is ahead of you, and you are hauling hazardous materials. When you stop for the crossing, you can stop as far away as how many feet from the nearest rail? 50 feet. A vehicle contains 500 pounds each of explosive 1.1 and 1.2. You must use explosives 1.1 placards. Now, which of the following must drivers have in their possession while transporting explosives 1.1 or 1.2? The written route plan. The symbol A appearing in column 1 of the hazardous materials table means that the hazardous material is what? Is subject to hazard material rules only when transported by air. When shippers package hazardous materials, they must certify that this was done according to the regulations, and the only exception is when the shipper is a private carrier carrying his or her own product. You should only stop before crossing a railroad grade if your vehicle is carrying what amount of chlorine? Any amount of chlorine. Your vehicle contains explosives, oxidizers, or flammables. No one may smoke within how many feet of the vehicle? 25 feet. When hauling packages of explosives, you must never use hooks or other metal tools. If there is an RQ before or after the item description of the shipping paper, it means the carrier must report a spill of this material. If you must leave a placarded vehicle on the public roadway, it must be watched by a qualified person who will comply with all requirements. If you are loading or unloading any type of explosive, you must make sure that the cargo heaters have been disabled. The quantity of the hazardous material being transported must appear on the shipping paper. When? At all times. The total transport index of all radioactive material packages in a single vehicle must not exceed 50. The hazard class of a 2-liter bottle of material is flammable liquid. If the description also says poison inhalation hazard, you should placard the vehicle with both poison and hazard class placards. A route restriction. What before transporting certain radioactive materials? A route restriction may be necessary. Who transport hazardous materials must receive training to recognize and identify hazardous materials? Employee, every employee. A vehicle transporting hazardous materials must be placarded on how many sides? 4. Now there are 2 lists that drivers, shippers, and carriers use to find out if a material is a regulated product. One of these lists is the List of Hazardous Substance and Reportable Quantities. Marine pollutants are regulated in what? Bulk quantities only on the highway. They're regulated intrastate and interstate commerce. The blank and blank monitors spills of hazardous substance named in a list of hazard substances and reportable quantities. The blank and blank. The DOT and the EPA. One of these shipping papers describes for a hazardous product is in the right order. Which one is it? Corrosive liquids, NOS. A hazardous waste manifest must be treated as a shipping paper. You do not need a blank placard if the vehicle contains Division 1.3 explosives and displays a placard stating blank. Dangerous explosives A. Division 1.2 explosives may not be transported in a vehicle combination if it includes a placarded cargo tank. You may load cylinders of compressed gas in a vehicle without racks if the cylinder can be loaded on the vehicle laying down flat and braced. Before you move a cargo tank loaded with a hazardous material, you must be sure that all valves do not leak. You may not park within blank of a blank if your vehicle contains Division 1.3 explosives. 300 feet of a building. You find an overheated tire during an en route inspection. If you are transporting hazardous materials, you must check your tires every how many hours or how many miles, whichever is less. Every 2 hours or 100 miles. Drivers must have special training before transporting what? Flammable cryonic liquids. When transporting chlorine in cargo tanks, you must have an approved gas mask. Which code requires that diamond-shaped warning signs be placed on some hazardous materials? Title 49 CFR. A hazard class name or ID number may not be used to describe what? A non-hazardous material. A person who transports hazardous waste in California must obtain a blank from the Department of blank. Hazardous waste transporter registration from the Toxic Substance Control. You are in the sleeper berth of a vehicle placarded for hazardous materials. Where must the shipping papers be? On the driver's seat. A motor carrier who transports hazardous materials subject to VC 27903 must have a what? A hazardous materials transportation license. A route restriction blank before transporting certain radioactive materials must be necessary. Drivers who transport highway route controlled radioactive materials must have had special training from who within the previous what? From their employer within the previous 2 years. The WHO is responsible for checking that a hazardous material shipment is correctly named and labeled. The shipper. If the word forbidden appears in the blank of the hazardous materials table, the material blank transported appears in column 3. The material must never be transported. Marine pollutants are regulated in blank in bulk quantities on the highway. Intrastate and interstate commerce. An X or an RQ shown in the HM column of the shipping paper. This means that the material in the shipment is a hazardous material. One of these shipping papers descriptions of a hazardous product is in the right order. Which one is it? Corrosive liquids, NOS. Which of the following is not an acceptable exception to a shipper's certification on a shipping paper? The shipper is a private carrier transporting a product not his own. Transporters of hazardous waste must keep the copy of a hazardous waste manifest for a minimum of how many years? 3. Animal foodstuff should not be loaded in the same vehicle with what? Division 2.3 gases. You may load cylinders of compressed gas in a vehicle without racks if the cylinders can be loaded on the vehicle lying down flat and braced. It is the what responsibility to obtain permits or use special routes if required to transport hazardous materials. Whose responsibility is it? The driver's. What signals may be used to warn other drivers of a stopped vehicle transporting Class 3 materials? Reflective triangles. You may not park a vehicle carrying hazardous materials within how many feet of an open fire? 300. When fueling a placarded vehicle, someone must always be At the nozzle, controlling the fuel flow. A hazardous waste manifest must be treated as a shipping paper. The intent of the hazardous materials rules and regulations is to contain the product, communicate the risk, and neither of the above. You are transporting 2,000 pounds of Class 8 materials. You may park within blank feet of the blank of the road. 5 feet of the traveled part of the road. Which code requires that a diamond-shaped warning signs be placed on some hazardous materials? Title 49 CFR. If you want to know how to get all the answers to all the endorsement tests, send me an email. I can get them to you for like $5. Congratulations! Listen to this video once or twice. Go in and take your test, you'll pass it. If not, see my audio series on the DMV handbook. You can listen to the real deal straight from the DMV. Thank you so much, and safe driving.